This lesson is a general look at some reading tips and what I've cobbled together and called the Reading Apprenticeship. Now, first of all, the teacher thinks about the way he or she makes sense of a text, that's you, the teacher, and then the teacher describes this process for the students. So one of the first steps is to make your reading process visible. Basically take something and say, this is what I do. Now, as a reader, as an effective reader of text, you probably use some or all of the following. You approach what you read with a purpose. As facts are presented, you accept or challenge them. In other words, they might not be facts, they might be dubious, right? You take a stand on the topic, developing a silent conversation with the author. You develop a gist of the text that serves as a framework for understanding subsequent parts. Now, these are the kinds of things that you do naturally, that occur to you naturally as you're encountering a text. The thing is to think about your reading process more directly and to convey that to your students. You also probably use some of these things to evaluate your understanding. You recognize at some point that you don't understand the passage, so you say it out loud, as Chef Rail is doing in this little screen capture. You realize that you've merely scanned a section, so you reread it, as I frequently do. And there's no doubt that you relate your existing knowledge to the new content. You interpret new words by context. Once you can help students see what happens in your mind as you read, you can demystify the process, teach to your students, and make them apprentices. That is, apprentices. Yes, grasshopper, now you are worthy. The best readers see connections between what they know and the new information in reading assignments. Ask questions of themselves while reading and of the authors they read, establishing a kind of dialogue, as I said before, between themselves and the text. Draw inferences while reading and after reading. You start understanding things about the ideas in the text, obviously, during that process, and then, of course, as you ruminate on it after the process. Select important ideas and supporting details. You're able to cull from, as a good reader, those important elements of the text and those specific elements that support those ideas. You synthesize information within a particular text and from multiple sources. So again, you connect up whatever the content of that article or that reading is, and you compare it and contrast it with other sources, and you come to some sort of viewpoint because of those connections, because of those points of contact. Repair misconceptions or faulty comprehension. Now, again, this is especially important for the students because they'll go into things thinking frequently that they know all about a topic or that they've got a real feel for something, and they should be cognizant that the reading oftentimes is going to correct their faulty view of the topic. And good readers, of course, evaluate the effectiveness of their comprehension. You say to yourself, have I really understood this? You check for it in various ways, which we'll talk about a little later. Purpose-driven reading effectively directs your students' efforts. So this is one of the things you want to do. You don't just set a paper in front of them, an article in front of them, even a chapter from a textbook and say, read this, right? You probably know this already, yeah? Okay, so one of the things you do is tell them to seek specific information. So in this case, covering a construction class, you say, look for important information about joist and stud spacing as it pertains to building codes. Maybe you tell them to find facts. What are the staple foods of coyotes in rural, suburban, and urban areas? Collect data. In the last decade, have vector or airborne diseases infected more people in Missouri? What infectious diseases have had the highest percentages of serious complications? Make inferences. The study discusses changes in muscle tissue on mitochondrial level in some patient groups. How is this likely to affect the way this family of drugs, the topic of the article, is prescribed in the future? Search for the central thought. Leopold is viewed as one of the most influential spokesmen for agricultural and environmental issues. What are the two most important claims he makes in regard to farming and to what we now call the ecosystem? Connect new subject matter with what's already familiar. In what ways is the protocol for treating a back injury similar to that of responding to a leg fracture? How is it dissimilar? That, of course, assumes that you would have covered that first protocol, and now you're going on to cover another one. The reading is. Investigate a point of view or bias. The author presents claims for and against Bt crops. Does he favor one side or the other? Is the examination of evidence fair? Why or why not? So if you build those kinds of questions around the readings that you put in front of your students, clearly they should be able to cull information from those texts more effectively, take more good stuff to the bank. All right, assignments are also made easier by a very specific reading objective. For instance, what is the effect of a lack of exercise on the bones of the arms and legs? Within a health-related class, obviously. And they would take this from the text. They'd find this passage. Lack of exercise leads to poor bone mineralization and lowers the rate of bone regeneration, says osteopath Philippe Rau. For this reason, inactivity in childhood will weaken your bones, and it may increase osteoporosis risk later in life, as is the case with these two fellows. Ah, yes. All right, consider directing reading by instructing students to read from a particular point of view within a specific context. So before putting a journal article in front of them, before putting a supplemental reading in front of them, again in a health class in this case, as an RN who works in a community outreach program for elderly people, gather information on the importance of 1. Regular exercise, 2. The need for calcium in the diet, and 3. Factors or conditions that would require use of calcium supplements. Do your best to get students engaged in the text. I guess that goes without saying, right? There are several tactics that can increase the level of engagement. As they read, they should picture elements from the text. They could use pictures from movies, television shows, and places they've been to help them see locations and things they've never seen. So what does the working of a research laboratory really look like? They've seen Contagion, they've seen films like this. As they're reading about that professional laboratory, they've got these ideas in their minds already. They can use those, often with some success, to picture what that laboratory might look like. Not a level 5 containment laboratory like the one on the left necessarily. Nevertheless, I think you get the point there. All right, in a broader sense, tell the students, try to visualize what you read. Here's a little bit of fiction. She had sort of oaky hair that the sun and salt had bleached, done up in a bun that was unraveling, and kind of a prim face. Tell someone else what you've just read. Now, this is the way I like to do it. It's pretty effective. To tell somebody about what you've just read, it doesn't mean you have to be in proximity. You don't have to be in the room with them. You can tell them by phone, right? As students like to do. I don't know if it'll cause disconsternation, as it has in this case, but anyway, here it is. Tell them by phone. Your listener might have an interest in what you're saying, or she might be indifferent. She might even be bored by what you're saying. But by articulating what you've covered in the reading, you'll be able to keep that information in your mind a lot more soundly than if you never articulated it. So urge them to tell other people about what they've read. Reread. Sometimes when you go back over a sentence or even a word, the phrase or word will glisten. You'll see the significance of what you've reread and the idea will become clearer. So here we have This fellow wondering, pondering, and then an epiphany, a breakthrough. Think about adjusting your reading speed. Slow down or speed up. Write down a quick response to a passage. Argue with it. Reword what you've read. Ponder specifics. Consider situations to which the claim would apply. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates that iron string. Really thorough, including Lindsay Lohan's. I think the evidence is there. Or take something complex or technical, the subject, aspirated vomitus, and try to put that into plain English. The person threw up in his mouth and breathed it in. Writers also expect that you will infer some of the meaning and that not everything is explicitly stated. So your students confront something like this, it's not all laid out on the line for them. Oxygen cylinders are made from seamless drawn steel and tested with water hydrostatic pressure of 3,360 psi. The cylinders are equipped with a high-pressure valve that can be opened by the hand wheel on top of the cylinder. The valve should always be opened by hand and not with a wrench. Well, there could be consequences of that. Leaky cylinder. This photograph is labeled gas explosion. Some ways to approach assignments that will help us understand and improve concentration. Anticipate. So when there's a statement in the text, what as a reader do you think is coming next? Get your students to start thinking that way. Do your best to predict what the text will present next. Yes. Prepare for discussions. When chapters are assigned, you're expected to contribute to discussions of the topics. So this can give us a framework within which to focus. Right? Learn independently. Tell them it's not all going to come from lecture. It's not all going to be reiterated in lecture, right? Understand that often a teacher, yourself, is expecting the student to understand that the information's been gathered by that student. That student should be conversant with the topics that are covered in the reading when they walk into class. It's not all going to be laid out or reiterated in the classroom. Write a concise summary. Okay? So, you can gauge how well you understand the text. Sometimes you can tell how well you understood it or where the gaps in understanding are when you write out several key ideas in your own words. Another little tactic that might help you pay attention is to hear a distinct reading voice. It might sound ridiculous to some of you, but it works for people. When I have to slow down and understand a science article, I like George Page, the former narrator of Nature. I like him the best. But when you hear Adam from Mythbusters, the Geico Gecko, or whomever, you're less likely to read automatically and more likely to listen to the text. The forests are oxygen factories. That idea makes zero sense. You trust me, mate, but why? When you see connections to your experiences or prior knowledge, you'll pay more attention. Before you read, write down a few brief notes on what you already know, or what you think you know about the subject and or the author. Then as you read, jot down a note each time something goes against prior beliefs, adds to what you already knew, or corrects a mistake about the subject. Armadillos are expanding their range. More are found in Missouri each year. Although they are passive creatures, the curious should avoid handling them because they can carry the bacillus for leprosy. Existing knowledge and scary new knowledge. Ask what type of ladder would be the safest in wet conditions while working around electricity. Most people would say wooden. In fact, fiberglass ladders are safer. They do not conduct electricity, whereas wood can wick up water. Faulty prior information, and then the mistake corrected, the misconception corrected. And again, notice where that information, where that key information is placed in the constructions, in the paragraphs, in that stress position near the end of the sentence, near the end of the paragraph, pushed to the right. That's where the students will generally find that good payoff information, the stuff that they'll be tested on, if you want to put it that way. Okay, there's another thing you should tell the students. Think out loud as you read, or read out loud. Okay, even a frustrated what can help, because when you've run into a tough spot and have to go back, break down that passage into bite-sized pieces. Look at a glossary, find definitions in a dictionary, write down questions for your instructor, whatever the case might be. All right, so here's an active mind at work. Train yourself to recognize when and where you're having trouble. Be alert to trouble in several ways. If the only voice you're hearing is your own reciting the text, and you aren't A, hearing another reader, or B, yourself in conversation with the writing you're reading, sleep, and you could literally fall asleep. If you're not, in essence, having a dialogue with the author, asking questions, thinking about what your prior knowledge is, wondering about how it's being challenged by what that author is saying, could just drift off, right? And that'll be a sign of disengagement or boredom as you start to think of something else. You begin daydreaming while lines pass under your eyes. And some of the fellas might dream of Megan Fox, and gals of Channing Tatum, and I of Sharon Stone. But you ought not to be thinking of any of them, not in the middle of a reading, right? Okay. If you stop for any reason you cannot remember what you read seconds before, it's obvious the reading has been merely mechanical. Your eyes have been moving left to right over and over, but no information's been processed. Yeah. I'm sure he's able to grasp the tone, meaning, and everything else of that text by Shirley Jackson. Okay, so here are some final things to consider, final things to pass on to your students, final things to help instruct them in reading effectively. While they're reading, take commercial breaks every 20 minutes or so. That is, set aside the reading, get up and move around for a few seconds, and then think about what you've just read. During breaks, or when the inspiration rises, write out a sentence or two about the main points of the section that you just completed, and/or record some key facts or data that you might well be quizzed on. Read the more difficult passages out loud. Hearing the words through your ears, not merely in your mind's ear, helps your mind collect information with a tighter net. After an hour of reading, give yourself a mindless break. Watch 15 minutes of a ball game. Take in a half-hour TV show. Just entertain yourself long enough to get refreshed and recharged. Don't try to plow through hour after hour, reading assignment after reading assignment. Once you've finished your reading, talk to someone else about it. It doesn't matter if that listener is actively interested or not. When you talk about the content, you ensure that a significant amount of it will be packaged in your mind. All right, so those are general tips about reading, about effective reading passages, and we'll see those applied in more specific ways to particular readings in photonics, in healthcare, and etc. in some subsequent lessons. That's all for today. Bye-bye.